Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video features true scaries from the deep. There's nothing more horrifying than dark depths of the ocean. These stories will truly scare you to your very core. Sit back, relax, and stay sinful. Story number 1. I have family who have sailed around the world. One day in the North Atlantic, their sailboat was going over some gigantic swells. They didn't have brakes at the top, so it was safe, but the boat was rising and falling way beyond the neutral. At the bottom of a trough, my uncle looked up to see the sun behind a wave and the silhouette of a whale inside, directly above him. Story number 2. It was a foggy night off the shore of Long Island, and I was on a 75-foot schooner. The fog was so thick that you couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of you. The captain tells me there's no point to continue my watch at the bow of the ship, so him and I start talking at the stern. About that time, there is a thunk on the side of the ship. We both turned to see a figure dressed in black flowing robes walking towards us on the outside of the ship. The robes were scratching down the outside of the ship. It keeps coming closer and is high enough in the air that the top was about even with our heads. It turns out that it was just a black flag to mark a lobster pot, but for those first few seconds, it was terrifying. Story number 3. Dad used to be an Abalone diver as a young man in Victoria. Money by the bag if you wanted it enough. Though, half the guys that do it act like they're on cocaine most of the time from all the nitrogen in their blood. So it's a dangerous game you can only play for so long. There's one story he told me once, and only when he got drunk on his 50th, about an encounter he had while diving with a mate. The water in that part of Australia is thick, black, and cold. The kelp is so thick that some people get lost in it and tangle their breather hose, or more often than you'd think, just disappear. Anyway, he's diving off a shelf face at about 90 meters, and it's completely black. He said you would just pull yourself along the face grabbing abalone by feel. The pressure is enormous, and there are great whites swimming around with their mouths open, who regularly attack divers or cut air hoses, which by the time you realize, you're already dead. He was making his way along this shelf, collecting and felt a nudge on his back. His mate and him always worked close in tandem, so he just assumed it was him and reached out to pull him closer. But as soon as his hand touched, it just smashed him out of the way, got its tail wrapped around the air hose, which ripped off the connectors to Dad's mask. So he immediately got his little pen light that he kept on his dive belt for checking cuts, and he sees the end of the hose a few meters away spewing bubbles. The thing that gave me chills is the way he described that in the inky darkness 90 meters down. He could see nothing but the reflection of the bubbles from the hose, and the dark, lifeless eye of the great white behind it. From what I can piece together from the odd story and anecdote, that was the last dive he ever did, recreational or commercial. He's never told anyone except me and one of his brothers, and I'd never dare tell my mother. Story number 4. When I was 12 years old, my father and I were on a trip near Key West. It was a night dive, the first I've ever done, and we were preoccupied with spotting an octopus. They're fairly rare, shy creatures, and I was fascinated with them as a kid. They're mostly nocturnal predators, so there was a chance I'd get to see one on this dive. It turns out they're not the only nocturnal predators. We spot one out in the open, and a group of us shined our flashlights on it. It was completely translucent, floating through the water with its tentacles flowing behind it like a cape. It was a big one, too. We spent maybe 5 minutes following it, and I was awestruck. I was so transfixed on the creature that I hadn't kept track of what was going on around me. I felt a tap on my shoulder and looked up to see my father. He pointed all around us. I shined my flashlight up and it illuminated a solid wall of flashing scales. The light went up and up, all the way to the surface. So did the scales. It was a wall of Barracuda from floor to ceiling. We were totally surrounded. They hunt at night and a school of them were passing over our group. Fortunately, they have extremely poor eyesight and were just checking us out. No real danger. They don't find humans appealing for the most part. They passed after a minute, but to this day I can remember that flashlight moving up and up the wall. Story number 5. A tentacle came up out of the water and hit the side of the craft. Once, twice, 3 times. The biggest fucking tentacle I've ever seen in my life. At least 20 feet long. Just thwack, thwack, thwack. And then it was gone. No time to react or do anything. Just me on the deck thinking, what the fuck? And then standing perfectly still for 5 minutes wondering if I just seen what I thought I saw. And if so, whether that motherfucking thing was going to come back. A mixture of terror and disbelief that just boggled me into paralysis. Raised sails and got the fuck out of there right quick, once I finally came to my senses. But holy hell, that's one story I don't tell anyone in real life, ever, because it's just too unbelievable. Even as a fish story, no one would pretend to buy it. So what was it? I don't know. Maybe a giant squid that got pissed at me for some reason? Don't know. Don't care to know. So as long as it never happens again. Story number 6. I came across a man who'd hung himself on his boat 5 or 6 miles offshore about 4 or 5 years ago. The eerie and truly creepy part was realizing what it was. We just saw a boat out in the middle of the ocean's nowhere, without anything other than blue horizon in sight, at the break of dawn, and there was a fairly thick fog, as it had rained the night before. Realizing that the figure hanging from the boom was a man was one of the most haunting things I will ever see. Story number 7. Back when my father was in commercial fishing, he noticed there was a t-shirt in the middle of his net after one tow. After a little investigation, he found that it was not a shirt, but a human torso wearing a shirt. He said he was terrified that he would open the net and a head would roll out onto his feet, but it didn't happen. His captain radioed ahead. They brought the torso back to the docks, where they were met by a police and a coroner. They were eventually able to identify the body, based on the clothing, as a victim of a plane crash that had occurred fairly recently. My dad said he offered a free lobster to the coroner, who graciously accepted it, till he found out that it had been found in the net with the body. After that, he got angry and told him to throw it back. Story number 8. The sea is a vast and seemingly empty place. Many fail to grasp this when asking questions like, how can you just lose an airplane in the ocean? I found myself on a ship somewhere in the vast expanses of the South Pacific Ocean. We had been cautiously avoiding big storms, which I knew to be all around us, although our local ocean area was calm and peaceful. I was on watch when I noticed something out there, in the distance bobbing along, that I had never seen before, especially this far from land. As I got closer, I identified what was clearly a makeshift raft, made from lashed together bamboo with a snapped mast and an empty cooler moored to the deck. Upon this raft was not a soul. The chances of coming across a raft to begin with are small enough in that part of the ocean. Thinking about the person or persons who once sailed that raft, why they sailed, and how they met their fate, that was what creeped me out. Story number 9. I was working on a car carrier 4 years ago in the Middle East. Our typical route went through pirate waters at times, so we always picked up 4 ex-Marines as security in Aqaba, Jordan before we went. One night while we were going through pirate waters off of Yemen, we started to have problems with the main engine. So we stopped and had to drift for a bit to figure out what the problem was. During this time I was working on the stern, which is the back end of the vessel. I couldn't really see anything out in the ocean. Everything was dimly lit on the ship. I don't know why, but I got bored and turned on the spotlight, and there he was. This guy with a gun in a rusted little boat, staring at me 15 feet from the ship. I just stared back at him, kind of stunned. I was afraid if I reached for the radio to call one of the Marines, he would shoot me. So he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he sort of gave me a nod, as if he was telling me, "Well played." I gave him one back. Then the man slowly rowed his boat back off into the deep pitch black night. I didn't know how many others there were, but I did call it in on the radio as soon as I lost sight of him. I still remember his face today, that deep, stern, concentrated look. Story number 10. One day while we were off the coast of North Carolina, doing some grouper and snapper fishing, the bite suddenly fell off and everything disappeared off the scope. It went silent. Everyone's rods bended over at the same time, and we all had something enormous on our lines. After about 15 minutes of slow bringing our lines up, we all had 15-foot-long bull sharks on. They were completely calm, no thrashing or anything. The creepy part was, right below them in the water was a wall of bull sharks. There had to be hundreds of them. They were just swimming in circles. We de-hooked them, and they slowly swam back with the giant school. We left the area. Story number 11. I was on an aircraft carrier. No flight operations. I was the junior guy they had to sit around and watch the radar. CNN Basic Instinct on continuous loop. I noticed a blip which was no big deal. Either commercial or a French carrier had something going on. However, the next blip showed it had traveled quite a distance. At 7 seconds per sweep, it was running over 2,000 miles per hour. My first thought was that it was an SR-71 type badass, but my radar was for ATC. That thing would have to be pretty low for me to see at 50,000 feet tops. The next return verified the speed. It was the 4th turn that qualifies as creepy. The aircraft had turned 90 degrees. It was headed south, then it turned east. We had planes that could run that fast, but nothing that could turn that fast that I'm aware of in the early 1990s. Another sweep and it was gone. A buddy of mine in the CDC, the Combat Direction Center, saw the same thing. Both of us were pretty excited about it. We reported it up and they blew it off. So I don't know about cow mutilation or alien abductions, things like that, but I'm absolutely convinced I saw a UFO that day. Story number 12. On the Pacific side of South America, I believe we were off the coast of Peru or Chile. I can't remember. I was working night shift, so I was out on the flight deck to watch the sun come up. The strangest damn thing I've ever seen. The ocean was dead calm, like a lake. Seriously, no ripples, no waves, just dead calm. Like you found a small pond up in the mountains that was completely undisturbed. The moon was bright in the sky, but there was still a lot of light from it. The moon made it feel all that more eerie. Besides the noise from the ship, it was completely silent. One of the weirdest experiences I've ever had. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Sinful's Horror. Follow me on Twitter at Sinful Savant. Email your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com to have your story featured on an upcoming video. Till we meet again, stay sinful.